Saturday, May 18th, 2024, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. We're going to look at the dollar today. And by the dollar, I mean the Federal Reserve note, the fiat dollar system. And I think this week marks an important landmark in the challenge to the dollar, not just from overseas, but also domestically. So that's what we'll focus on. We'll also look at gold and silver towards the end of the video. And before I start, just wanted to thank you all for the interest in the channel. And I wanted to ask you to make sure you subscribe to the channel if you enjoy my videos, and also make sure that you hit the like button if you enjoy a particular video, and also hit the little notification bell to be notified of all my new videos. So the reason why I said the fiat dollar is because constitutionally the dollar is a weight of silver and gold, and it was set by the Coinage Act of 1792. What we use today, not just in the United States, but also in the UK and everywhere around the world, is not really money. They're credit instruments, you know, the banknotes or the dollar bills. Banks nowadays don't really hold any money. They're just like credit institutions, and if you think you've got money in the bank, think again. What you have legally is an unsecured loan to the banks, and what you think even as cash, the paper money or the paper currency or the copper nickel base metal coins, it's not really cash. Real cash has always been gold and silver, but that's a different story. But let's start with the domestic challenge. And I've spoken a little bit about the fact that there are a lot of states within the United States that are challenging or trying to pass laws to make gold and silver tax-free, and then also to make it legal tender. That's a challenge to the Federal Reserve. And we're going to look at that as well today, of course, because it's not just the states that are doing this, but federally, we just got an announcement by Congressman Thomas Massey from Kentucky. And this was on May 16th. And I think, of course, in the gold bug world or the sound money world that we're in, you've probably seen this, but in the mainstream, of course, I don't think anyone's talking about this, but I think it's highly significant. So it's a press release, and it says, Representative Massey introduces Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act to end the Fed. I mean, that's music to my ears. I've been trying to expose central banks, not just the Fed, well, for many years, even before the '08 crisis. And why? Well, because I learned about the system when I first bought my Krugerrands back in 2002, the gold Krugerrands. And when you hold physical gold, it like changes you, and you want to learn more about gold and money. And I learned a lot of things that I didn't know before then. And I'd been working in finance for like 15 years, which is weird. But anyway, let's go through this press release, and then we're going to go over some congressmen in the past that have been critical of the Federal Reserve. Then I'm going to recommend a few books about the Fed. And then we're going to go to the challenge to the dollar from overseas, and I think that one is even more significant. So, Representative Thomas Massey, Republican, Kentucky, announces the introduction of H.R. 8421, the Federal Reserve Board Abolition Act, Representative Massey's legislation abolishes the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve banks. It also repeals the Federal Reserve Act, the 1913 law that created the Federal Reserve System. So as you can see, the system is a hybrid. You've got the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. They meet in that huge Mariner Eccles building, imposing building. Yes, central bankers always like imposing buildings because it makes them feel more powerful. It projects power. It projects like the solidness, right, of their crappy fiat currency, which basically doesn't really have any solidity to it. And then you have the 12 Federal Reserve banks. They are privately held by the commercial banks from those districts. And the New York Federal Reserve Bank, that's the most powerful one. It always has a vote on the Federal Reserve Board. And why? Well, because it's the biggest one. It's controlled by these people here. And this is the first book I'm going to recommend, Our Crowd, The Great Jewish Families of New York. And it was one of the scions of these families that recommended this book, Jim Sinclair, who used to be a gold bug and a sound money proponent. His family name originally really was Seligman. So, yeah, that's why the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is so powerful. That's why it holds all the foreign gold for foreign institutions, because everything goes through New York. But let's continue anyway. Americans are suffering under crippling inflation, and the Federal Reserve is to blame, said Representative Massey. I couldn't agree more with him. I agree 110%. Inflation is a government strategy. It's basically theft. But let's continue. During COVID, the Federal Reserve created trillions of dollars out of thin air and loaned it to the Treasury Department to enable unprecedented deficit spending. By monetizing the debt, the Federal Reserve devalued the dollar and enabled free money policies that caused the high inflation we see today. Well, I would say we're seeing high prices today. I don't want to be too picky with Representative Massey. The inflation was, of course, created by the Fed, which is the printing of money out of thin air. And they didn't do this just in during COVID. They did this after the 2008 collapse of the Wall Street banks to bail out Wall Street. Monetizing debt is a closely coordinated effort between the White House, Federal Reserve, Treasury Department, Congress, big banks, and Wall Street, Representative Massey continued. Through this process, retirees see their savings evaporate due to the actions of a central bank pursuing inflationary policies that benefit the wealthy and connected. If we really want to reduce inflation, well, I would say we need to eliminate inflation. There wouldn't be inflation if we had sound money. The most effective policy is to end the Federal Reserve. So, of course, many of you know I'm not in the US, I'm not in America, I'm in the UK. So why am I covering this? Well, because I think if Americans are able to abolish the Federal Reserve System, it's going to put a dagger in the heart of the Bank of England and the ECB. It's a huge move, and they would lose a lot of power, and hopefully one day the Bank of England will be abolished. It was created by royal charter in 1694, but it does exactly the same that the Fed does. So I'm going to put a link to this below in the description. Of course, he's just introducing this act or this bill. It doesn't mean that it's passed or anything. It's still going to be a long way. And I would say as well, if you're in the US, you can also send this link through email to your local congressman or congresswoman and tell them that you want them to get this bill through. So that's the challenge from within. And now we're going to look at the challenge from without. And this is a very serious challenge. And I've been talking about it for, well, over 7 years here on this channel. It's the challenge to what's called the petrodollar. It's the same thing as the dollar, but is the foreign version, overseas version of the dollar. And of course, China and Russia have been the biggest challengers. They've been planting the seeds to be able to do it for many, many years. I spoke about in 2016 how the Chinese were creating futures and commodities exchanges to trade not just gold and silver, but all other commodities. And that's becoming really, really more important, those exchanges. We're seeing that the price of gold and silver really now are being set over there. But I think this past week, especially Thursday and yesterday, are going to be seen as, you know, when you look back historically, as a historic meeting between Putin, who flew to Beijing, and the president of China, Xi Jinping. And I'm not trying to take sides here. I'm just trying to tell you what will happen to our pocketbooks because of these challenges. And I would say the president of China and Russia, they're not our enemies on an individual basis. I think their enemies are people like Mike Pompeo, who recently said he became a Christian when he went to West Point. And then a few years ago said that as head of the CIA, the things he did the best were to lie, steal, and cheat, right? Those are your enemies, I think. And we have enemies like that here in the UK as well. You know, the deep state, the neocons, the central banks. So what I'm trying to say is that there's going to be a lot of pushback to this meeting between Xi and Putin. You know, the mainstream is going to be all over them, but you know that the mainstream media is owned by the people that are in charge of Mike Pompeo, the deep state, the neocons, Biden, right? But let's look at why I think this is important, this meeting. Well, the FT seems to think it's very important. It says Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping vow to cooperate against destructive and hostile U.S. Russia and China agreed to tighten military ties and deepen economic partnership after talks in Beijing. So this is highly significant because a week ago and even maybe a month ago, you had first Yellen go to China to, tell the Chinese how to conduct their fiscal policy, and they said no thanks. And then last week you had Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's a neocon, of course. He went to China. He left Xi Jinping waiting. And he said, stop helping Russia. And this is the answer they gave the United States. No, they're going to be even closer to Russia. And there's some interesting clips of the visit. And you can see that actually Xi Jinping hugged Putin. And someone said this is very unusual because the Chinese are not into that kind of stuff. So I think it's very significant. We also saw them walking around with a couple of guys behind them carrying these big briefcases. That's to say to the West, we've got nuclear weapons. And I think that's a bit worrying. But let's focus on the dollar. So I saw a very interesting tweet here. And this is what Putin said in Beijing. I think it was yesterday. It says 90%, and this is Putin, I'm quoting, 90% of all trade between China and Russia is conducted in ruble or yuan after ditching the US dollar. Many other countries will gradually join the new system of operation. Many dollars in the world will become surplus. Inflation will be brutal in the US and Europe in a few years and is already very bad. He's right. The bubble which inflates the West with huge foreign debts will burst in a very short time. I think President Putin is right. And he warned about the collapse of the dollar a couple of years ago, or maybe a little more. And I've been warning you that not just in the US, but in Europe and in the UK, all these foreign held currencies, especially the dollar, they're going to be surplus, like he said, and they're just going to sell it for real goods, for mining companies. We've seen the Chinese buy mining companies already with their dollars, or they're just going to sell it in the foreign exchange market. What that means is going to increase the supply of currency in the West, and that in itself is inflation. So how are the Chinese and the Russians protecting themselves financially? Because their fiat currencies are going to go down the drain as well, quite a bit. Well, they're buying gold and silver, right? Like with their two hands. They're really, especially in the last 2 years. And I think that's why I've been warning people that as individuals, we need to be doing that too. And I've been doing it for over 20 years. And I've been telling my viewers about it since 2015. And many of you have started doing it yourself. I don't tell you to do it, but if you do your homework and and look at money and what inflation is, I think there's only one way to protect your fiat savings versus inflation. So what else? I'm going to recommend a few more books here about the Fed, and then we'll talk a little bit about the action in gold and silver and the miners yesterday. Well, I recommended this one here already, Our Crowd, but I wanted just to read a passage here that tells you why the Federal Reserve is run by Wall Street. And it's on page 40. It says, in the panic of 1837, Belmont was able to perform a service which he would repeat in subsequent panics, and which helped make him a friend to bankers and to the United States government by negotiating large loans from the Rothschilds. And the Rothschilds sent him, as he was a very young guy, Belmont, at that time. They sent him from Frankfurt to Cuba. And then from Cuba, he went to the US. So he was like an agent of the Rothschilds, August Belmont. He was able to shore up the United States debtor banks. In other words, he was able, thanks to the hugeness of the Rothschild reservoir of capital, to start out in America, operating his own Federal Reserve System. Of course, it wasn't the Federal Reserve System. It was the Rothschild system, right? But the problem with that is that these panics got a little bit too dangerous for the bankers, because they, especially the panic of 1907, that they came up with the idea of the Federal Reserve System. And that's why Paul Warburg and others met at Jekyll Island. And Paul Warburg, of course, the Warburg family is in here. They met at Jekyll Island in 1910 to draw the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System. So what's the Federal Reserve System all about? Well, instead of the Rothschilds and others saving the day during panics, you'd have the taxpayer saving the day during the panics, and you'd have a national debt to be used to do that. And so the taxpayer always bails out Wall Street and the bankers. But when the bankers make their profits, they keep the profits. It's a great scheme, of course, for them, not for us, for the general public. The other book is End the Fed by Ron Paul. Yeah, Ron Paul has been a champion of ending the Fed, and I'm going to touch upon a couple of other congressmen that came before Ron Paul that were also very anti-Fed. And the last book is the granddaddy of exposing the Federal Reserve, and it's The Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins. He was in the 50s encouraged to look into the Fed by Ezra Pound, the famous poet, controversial guy too, Ezra Pound. So let's look at these two congressmen. The first one is Charles Lindbergh Sr. Yes, he was the father of Charles Lindbergh, the aviator. And this is what he said. Just as the Federal Reserve Act was getting ready to pass, and I quote, this Federal Reserve Act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President Woodrow Wilson signs this bill, the invisible government of the monetary power will be legalized. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking and currency bill. Charles Lindbergh Sr. The other one is a congressman, I think he's from Texas. He's passed away. Wright Patman, he said this about the Federal Reserve. In the United States, we have in effect two governments. We have the duly constituted government. Then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve System, operating the money powers which are reserved to Congress by the Constitution. He also said the dollar represents a $1 debt to the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve banks create money out of thin air to buy government bonds from the U.S. Treasury, and has created out of nothing a debt which the American people are obliged to pay with interest. I highly recommend that President Biden's chairman of the Council of the Economic Advisor, Jared Bernstein, reads that quote. Then he'll understand better how the system really works. And before we look at gold and silver, just want to add that Antony Blinken, the guy who went to China and was told to, like, get out, we don't want to hear you. I looked into his family history. His father was a very successful banker for a firm called Warburg Pincus. So it's a very small club, isn't it? And it's interesting that these people, maybe they're going to get their comeuppance, Wall Street and the bankers. We'll have to see, though. What about gold and silver? Yes, I wanted to say a couple of things. I think we are in a raging bull market now for gold and silver, or a raging bear market for the fiat currencies. I've said this in the past, that in a raging bull market, you have to really hold on to the bull, or else you can be thrown off the bull. And why is that? Well, because gold and silver are not going to go up in a straight line. There's going to be a lot of volatility and ups and downs. But the reason why I think we are in a raging bull market is first, because gold is broken out, above that 2070, 2100 level definitively now. And that's a very good signal. It means that a new bull market is underway. We've cleared that 2011 top for good. And silver, of course, we've been waiting for the break of this 30 level, which was a huge resistance back in 2020 and 2021, which the bullion banks and the regulators that they really control made sure, they made sure that silver didn't go above 30. They tamped down the silver price with the futures, right? That line has been broken as well. It looks like they've lost the battle at 30. So it all looks very good. But yes, we got to hold on to it. And what about trading? Well, trading is more for the mining stocks, gold and silver miners, and they did well. I think it's still early days. For the physical gold and silver that hopefully you've been stacking over the years, I think you just keep adding on, because this is an existential crisis for fiat currency. So why would you want to take profit and get out of sound money into fiat currency? That's all I have to say. I mean, you don't have to do that yourself. You might need the fiat currency. You've had a few profits and you have some bills to pay. But ideally, if you can keep your gold and silver, they will be there at the other side of a new system, I think, and they will always have some value. So, yeah. With that, I'm going to wish you all a very good weekend. Take care. Bye.